Okay, I'm not going to actually talk about definitions of poverty. There will be other people and other speakers who will do that. I work in an industry where I deal with the people who are the poorest of the poor. People who come to food banks who are dependent on charity for their very food that will be on the table tonight. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the work that I do and in particular the research project that I've undertaken. It has worried me that for many, many years we've seen an increasing number of people who come to food banks, and it just gets worse and worse every year. So if I was a business person saying, am I successful in my business in eradicating poverty and taking the food parcels numbers down, over 22 years I have failed miserably. So what has always intrigued me is what stops people from moving out of poverty. And I think we get lots of commentaries about how people should get off their butts, get a job, how people should do a training scheme, how people should turn their lives around. And we also get a lot of rhetoric about what we are doing to help them. So I decided to take 100 families who have been getting food parcels for over 5 years and find out what stops them moving out of poverty. Now, the researchers came up with whole lots of questions. It was like, how does a government cause poverty to stay entrenched? I kept saying, just want one question. One question. What stops families moving out of poverty? Now, it's a very simple research that we did. We took 100 families and we interviewed them every fortnight, for a year. So everybody had 26 interviews. We learnt their private stories because, as you will know, we all have a private story and a public story. Our private story goes, I'm feeling really crap today. I'm tired. I've had enough. My public story is, hello, isn't it a wonderful day? Everything's great. And we give our private and public stories to doctors, to the chemist, to people at school, to our children, to our mums and dads, and our other one's stories are in a different place. So we had this privilege of listening to people's private stories. We also did research in a different way. We didn't write everything down in a linear thing, saying how many children have you got? What's the names? What's their birthdays? Instead, we did things like a whakapapa. And we did whakapapas not only of their families, but their sisters' families. And we watched how children move between families. And I became very convinced at the end of that we're actually trying to support parents, but we're not supporting children very well because the money doesn't go to them. But what I want to do this morning, and quite briefly, is to show you some of the things that happen that stop families moving out of poverty. And this is by no means an exclusive list. The first one is, how do families actually get the things they need? Now, this is a family of four, and in a 2-week period, these are the agencies that they visited. Okay, there's 45 in case you can't count them. So in 2 weeks, the family went around. They went to numerous food banks. They went to Work and Income, Housing New Zealand. They went to the coroners because a child had died. They went to various health facilities. And actually, at the end of that 2 weeks, nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. They substantially got nothing more. Nothing changed in their lives, and their circumstances didn't change at all. And at the end of that 2 weeks, and in other weeks, subsequently, we will blame the family for not changing. And then the second thing we will do is we will hire navigators to help them around this. And very bluntly, I would say, in the centre of there we have a family whose lives are fairly stuffed. They're poor, they've got no money, they've got no life, their car's got a debt. And then we hire people who are slightly more skilled to navigate them around the reasonably incompetent agencies. And we spend an enormous amount of money doing this. When challenged, all of the agencies say, oh, we should network better together. We should have more morning teas and talk about it. We should find better ways of working. Nobody actually says to the family, how would this work better? And the family would say to me, why, Diane, don't we have an app on a smartphone so that we don't have to go to Wynn's office seeking $250? Why can't we be treated like other people? And people who watch these families will say, why should they have a smartphone? Okay. So the first thing we see is families who have an inordinate amount of organisations. You won't see it very well on that, but this mapping also has things like dotted lines, which show there's a breakdown of relationship. It has cross lines, which show that people won't go there anymore. And it shows the strength of their relationship. If anybody had enough time, you could actually put the cost of that relationship as well. How much does it cost for the agency to sit there? How much does it cost for my agency to do this work? And how much did the family get in their pocket? And it would be an interesting exercise. Okay, so for most of the families that we see, they have not enough money to pay either their power, their phone, any of the things that they've got. And I'll explain why in a minute. But first of all, the thing that is overwhelmingly the biggest problem they have is not enough food. Why? Because food is seen as a discretionary item. You have to pay the debt collector, you have to pay the power, you have to pay the rent, you might have to pay a school fee, but nobody knocks on your door and makes you pay for food. So food is seen as discretionary. If they've got $11 per person per week for food, they're doing well. So, if you haven't got food, what do you do? And this is a cycle of how one woman in a week, how she accessed food. So the first day is fine because the benefit comes in. But actually, the food she buys, that is shared with other family members because of people who are in the house that nobody knows about. Whether they're overstayers or people who've lost their benefits or families and friends, so they share the food out. 2 days later, there's nothing in the house, and she's reduced to going to Wynn's to look for another benefit. Catches a bus, takes her $5 on the bus, gets to Wynn's, she gets told no, and it's taken her 8 hours and 0 return. She comes to a food bank, and the food bank says you've had too many food parcels. We can't do it. She goes to the supermarket and she steals the stuff off the shelves because it's the only way she can put food on her table. So the supermarkets then take all the fish off the shelves, and you can only buy it behind the counter now in certain places in West Auckland because people actually steal so much from supermarkets that they're taking the basic food away from the shelves. This takes this woman 60% of her time. So 60% of her life is spent on food chasing. If you're spending 60% of your life on getting your sandwich or your food, you're not spending very much of your time on other things. The second thing that impacts so much on our families is debt. And this debt is, we talk about Amelia, and we talk about her being a young 18-year-old who falls in love, gets pregnant, and the partner says, my mother doesn't have a car and she's got a poor credit rating, would you sign it? And in her stupidity and ignorance, she does. And then the next one, and the next one, and the next one. 3 years later, 2 children, no partner, no mother-in-law, probably the good thing, no car, no television, no washing machine, all the debts. So because now she's paying so much money in debt repayment, interest rates from 117 to 700%. She's paying so much in debt repayment, she then has to go to the food truck and to the clothing truck who don't charge interest. No, but they actually have prices that are 15 times more than you'll find on the shelves at the groceries. But they've got no choice, it's the only place they can go to. Saddest part of all of this is, the only people that are nice to my clients are the debt collectors. They're the only people they have good, warm relationships with. Everybody else treats them really badly. So we have this following for food and for debt. And here's a journey, and you can see some of these later and look at them in more detail. Here's a journey of somebody who's trying to find $100 to actually pay a power bill. And what she does, she asks her friends, she asks her family, she tries to sell something off, she says she'll do a bit of work to do it, and in the end she's forced to the debt collector. What happens with our families are they're so entrenched. They pay more for everything. Anybody know what glowbug is? Put your hand up if you know what glowbug is, because that's great. If you pay glowbug for your power, you pay 60% more than anybody else does. They pay more for rent, for power, for debt, for everything. They get the least money and they pay the highest premium and price. And lastly, what does all this do? It alienates people. But what is this actually about? This is about scarcity. It's about scarcity of money, scarcity of food, scarcity of housing. And there's some lovely economic research that says when you live in scarcity like this, your IQ is affected. You lose 17 points of IQ in terms of just spending all your life focusing on the problem. And if you know if there's something in your life that you're worrying about, you don't worry about anything else. So some of the things we need to do is reduce scarcity. We need to look at debt consolidation programs. When families spend $100 in rent for a Housing New Zealand house, and that's great, but they've got $400 debt repayment each week, nothing is going to happen. So we need to look structurally at changing the way that we deal with families in poverty, and we need to look at perhaps putting money up front rather than dwindling money out over the period of their lifetimes.